professional. We'll just keep going.
Well, hello everybody. We are welcoming Sasha. I'll get the teeth in. Sasha Fancy, who you may know from Create and Craft. Hello and thank you for joining us on week 6 or it's Children's Week. And also a big hello to Alistair as well, who's sitting in the garden. And if he actually tells the truth, he has got a glass of gin and tonic. Yes, I thought it would come out. Sasha,
we're in the working rooms. Do you see this?
No, I've got a glass of water. That's about it. Sasha, thank you so much for coming on and joining us on the Sewing Bee Natter, which has been really popular. We have had so many comments from people, which has been great over the last few weeks. Now, tell us a little bit about yourself, Sasha, because anybody who doesn't know you, go.
I've been on, I started on Hochanda about 5-6 years ago now. So obviously I've seen it go from Hochanda to the craft store to Create and Craft. But I've always sewn, so I've always been around and about. So obviously I've worked for some of the bigger shows. I've organised workshops, I've done things like that. But most people know me for being the UK Bozel ambassador.
Well done. Well, and I'm the Vlizeline, so well,
exactly. We're actual. It's literally, but it doesn't ever cause an issue because some of the things what I was actually saying the other night on one of my talks was there's certain things that I use that I couldn't get anything other than Visaline and I love, and then there's other things that I think, right, I need my Bozel, but things like Decaville, for example, couldn't live without it.
No, that's right.
It works both ways, doesn't it?
Of course it does. There's room for everybody as well, isn't there? And
certainly is.
It shows that everybody plays really nicely together. It's true. So we're going to move straight into Kids Week. Love it or loathe it. What do they say? Don't work with animals and children is the normal rule. And the first the pattern challenge was a sequined bomber jacket. Now, the first thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to ask Alistair this question straight away because I've been watching on Facebook. There are several Facebook pages, shall we say, I think that's what they call them, or groups. And the main thing is, what is dead stock, Alistair?
All right, so I thought that question might come up. So dead stock is when, for instance, a fabric company produces a new season, and when it comes to the end of the season, they might have 3 volts of fabric left. And because the season has changed and the new season's coming in, that's what they call dead stock. Also, dead stock can be, for instance, if a department store has placed a big order with a factory, and to get the price of the fabric down, they buy it by the kilometer usually, and all that fabric gets shipped to the actual factory. The department store places their order, the factory make and cut exactly what it is, but they have rolls of fabric left. Factories don't want to have that fabric lying around because it takes up storage. The fashion houses don't want it back because they've nowhere to store it. So that's also what we call dead stock. So it's kind of end of line, if you like, fabric. So that's what the term is, dead stock. I know Patrick is trying to come from it from a point of view where it's sort of repurposing that sort of fabric. I mean, on that particular challenge, I thought you can't really, if you're using dead stock, you can't really then criticize somebody for their color choice or the choice of the sequin, because you're giving them a limited choice, which is dead stock, and you've put it there for a reason. So there's a few critiques on that first challenge I thought was a little bit unfair, purely and simply because it was dead stock fabric.
Now the other thing, it's always a big thing, color versus design. Esme regularly have the are you having a disco, Sasha?
What's going on there?
Having a little disco to herself. You see, she went to see the Foo Fighters last night. She still thinks she's there. That's what it is. So the thing, I thought this was quite a difficult challenge for them because yes, they're dealing with little people and little things aren't always easy to work with, but they dealt with sequined fabric. Obviously they had the lining and then they had the ribbing on the cuffs and the collar. Sasha, what did you think overall of the challenge?
I think 3 hours that they had was really tight. I think that's the one thing that I've noticed from this year. I think they would get so much more. I know they have to obviously cut it down, and I know they have to edit, but 3 hours for anybody to make something like that is quite tight, really. And like you say, they didn't seem to have a lot of knowledge of the whole sequin, working with sequin. I actually thought the webbing, the tubing, I thought actually most of them handled it quite well, apart from a bit of unbalance around the collar, because again, you're working with that stretch and sequins. It's a difficult one to do. I wouldn't have liked to have done that. And like you say, some people think that children's clothes are a lot easier because they're smaller, but actually for something like that project, it's quite difficult. It's how you take away some of those sequins to ease those seams, and they didn't really sort of have that top tips, I would say.
So Alistair, straight away, I mean, I was cringing as the needles were breaking.
Yeah.
I have to say, have you got any tips from the industry with regards to cutting sequin fabric as well? Because using your best scissors and then cutting through those sequins, and they did do a nice explanation as to what sequins were, and what they're hoping that they'll be ergonomically friendly in the future. But have you got any top tips for cutting to start with, and then sewing sequin fabric?
I would always put a slight stabilizer on the back, so I would actually put an interlining. And now interlinings is a bit of a myth. Interlinings does not mean that you're going to make it thicker. What you're going to do is you're adding a complementing backing, which acts the same as the fabric that's on the top. So if you're dealing with silks, you would use a very fine one. It just gives a little bit of extra body and stability, because sequin fabrics tend to come on a jersey background, not necessarily a woven one, although there were a few wovens. So that would be one of my tips. Also, use a slightly thicker needle.
Yeah,
you're piercing through thick layers, and then especially when you're punching through a zip tape and you're going through a layer of sequins, I would make sure that you would have put a stronger needle in that. You're punching through the sequin. You're not going to ladder the fabric, so you shouldn't be worried about that. But also, the only problem with that, and when I started seeing some of them unpicking it, once you put holes in sequins, they are there for life. They're not coming out. So I thought this challenge, though, I don't really know what was going on, because the thing is that they kept on making a big thing about the collar and about whether or not they'll because there was a bit of ambiguity whether or not there was the appropriate notches around the collar as to where they would have to stretch it. And I was thinking, well, that's why most of them aren't getting it right, but then common sense should tell you that's the collar pattern. That collar has to fit into that space. So you've already done the waistband, which we've said in other videos, where other episodes of this, where you've marked the center side, center front, center back, and what have you, and then you've appropriately pinned it and then stretched the project in. So I thought it was a bit odd that they didn't kind of grasp that. But then
there must have been something wrong with the pattern. I think there must have been something wrong with the pattern.
It didn't flow, did it? Something wasn't. And they sort of started talking about the notches and the fitting of it, and then they didn't mention it again until they started looking at them and saying that the collars weren't lined up. And I couldn't work out why the collars weren't lined up, where, like Alistair was saying, the notches are there. It's a bit like when we work with curves and patchwork wise, it's the same thing. You've still got that curve. It's just, you've just got to make it fit. You're not cutting it any bigger or any smaller. You're cutting the curve the same shape as the curve that you're trying to inlay. So you fold it, you make it fit. And I didn't get why all of a sudden it wasn't mentioned again until the end, when he was quite, well, it's not lined up.
I think also, Alistair, you've mentioned this before about the actual sample, because I made a particular notice of the sample, and I've written on the rib on the neckline was too tight on the actual sample, and also the cuffs weren't correct on the actual sample. So you've referenced this before. If the sample's not right, even for them to go and have a little look at that. But there was a big debate between all of them with regards to are the notches here and here. It felt as if there was either too many or too few notches, and they weren't clear which notches they had to use for them all to have a similar problem. Some of them were able to work it out and some of them weren't, but I wrote a big one there. Alistair, what did you think of the sample? Did you take notice of the sample this time, Alistair?
Well, I took notice of the sample. I mean, that collar, for instance, on that ribbon sits very, very close. Here, it doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't need, it should sit slightly proud of the body. It doesn't need to, it felt too, way too tight.
Yeah.
And it just shows that in actual fact, this was called the pattern challenge, and they're always marked every single week whether or not they've actually followed the pattern or not, because they can't deviate from the pattern. So for an integral part like the collar, not actually that there wasn't actually the notches there to guide them. It was quite evident there was something wrong with the actual pattern itself. But I think they tried to edit it and make it look as if this was all purposely done. But in actual fact, I think that was a glaring mistake, that pattern probably was rushed, and that there wasn't sufficient enough notches in the actual neckline itself to then place the collar in. I mean, yeah, it is a bit of common sense, but when I saw how small the collar was,
yeah, I
mean, the whole part of a bomber jacket is to be sort of slightly blouson. So you do, with the ribbon, you do make the cuffs a lot smaller, so the cuff circle is much smaller than the actual armhole, so there is a gathering essentially. And then around the waistband you want it to be close to the body. There is
we're just losing
extra gathering in there, so obviously how it was edited. Oh, you still hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah, we just lost you a little bit when you said the waistband obviously sits close to the body, but there's that blouson effect on the jacket. So whilst we're still talking about it, did you give advice with regards to, or was I not listening to you about cutting sequin fabric? What would you just use your normal scissors, Alistair? Your good dressmaking scissors?
No, you wouldn't use your good dressmaking scissors. You would go and buy for instance, when I did the pom-pom books, I had some much cheaper scissors that I used purely and simply for that purpose. I wouldn't use my Japanese scissors on the sequins, because you just don't. And plus, also the sequins, when you're cutting through them, they can take a bit of manhandling, so you don't necessarily have to. I mean, in a factory, they've got big saw cutters, so that's how they would be cutting them. So no, I wouldn't. Luke was quite right when he was actually saying this is not a time when you use your best dressmaking scissors. Although he was using his
he was using the Prym gorgeous dressmaking scissors. Talking about the interlining on the back, there's a Vliseline one, and it's the G770, and it's got a little bit of stretch into it. It comes in different colours, so this is such a light interlining. Had to put that on the back. That was my thought immediately. That would have just solved them so many problems. And this is fusible as well, so you could fuse it. The other thing was, and that's going straight into dealing with sequins. And again, I'm going to ask Alistair. Sorry, Sasha, I will come to you.
No, you're fine.
It's with regards to the pressing. I was screaming at, where's your pressing cloths? You're putting a hot or warm iron on top of these sequins. Alistair, give me some advice.
I mean, you don't. Yeah, there's a product that we already sell, which is the Vliseline iron-on cloth, which is a bit of a game changer. But you don't have to use anything. Over an old tea towel will do. You can use tissue paper. You can use chip paper if you want to. Or if you've got craft paper lying around, you can use that. It doesn't have to be, or for instance, if you've got some old wrapping paper that you just don't really like anymore, and you haven't quite hasn't quite come back into vogue, then you can use that. But not to use anything, I thought was a bit of a cardinal mistake, because at the end of the day, they are nylon, and any heat or trying to press, it's a difficult one with sequins, because you don't want to top stitch something like that. You want to actually, I mean, in the couture industry, we would hand tack that back, and we would do a technique that we use on the front to keep seams down. We would stab stitch it, so it's little pin pricks all the way up the seam. You usually do that once you've put the actual lining in, just so that you're only going through the layers that you actually need, and you don't see it's invisible. We do make it more visible when we're doing a tailored jacket, like for like a Savile Row kind of vest thing, because you want to see those teeny weeny little dimples, but they have to be exactly spaced. So it's all about the needlework and quality.
And what about then, to add, to add to the trauma of dealing with sequin fabric, putting a lining in, using the ribbon, then we'll have a zip as well. So have you got any tips? Because bless, there was a few of them got the sequins caught in the zip. What would be your top tip there, Alistair?
Sequins caught in the zip, I would just make sure that obviously, if it's dependent on the size of your sequin. If you like ginormous sequins, and you're going to come into a bit of a problem, but I would just make sure that if you can, when you're cutting the garment out, if you cut it on a straight part of the sequin, you'll find a natural line where it goes. If you find that straight line, you might be clever enough just to get it in the channel where the two sequins start to kiss, where they meet up again for the next sort of like line. If you like pinstripes, if you like, treat it exactly the same way. So I would do something like that. But also, it's quite interesting that for this challenge, and I think it's only because it was a small garment, they thought, oh well, it's much smaller, it won't take them as long to sew the seams, let's get them to line it out. I've never seen a pattern challenge yet where they've actually required them to actually finish it properly, where putting in a lining. Also, another quick tip, they were having a lot of problems when they were trying to attach the cuffs and basically magically pull it all through. If you actually pull the cuff through the hole, and you bring the two sections, so the lining and the actual cuff, and you sew in the round, so you're almost making it you're almost sewing that in the round, but you're making kind of like an infinity scarf, if that makes sense. And then when you pull that through, the lining just goes straight through. If your lining seems a little bit too long, a little trick that you can do is you can actually tack it up here in the armhole, so you can actually pull it up. Also, what I would do along the shoulder seam is you do that stab stitching technique through the seam that you've created here, and you catch the lining underneath. And if there's a shoulder pad in there, you go through the shoulder pad and catch the lining. That's what we do on suits. That's what keeps that perfectly in place here, because you don't want anything to drop. That gives an extra bit of stability. If, for instance, the sleeve is much heavier, because that whole blues on sleeve with the weight of the sequins, that is going to pull. So if your lining is too big because you've got a pleat in the back to give you some ease for the shoulder blades, you want that extra bit of ease just to keep the actual sleeve where it needs to be when it's hanging.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. So, Sasha, the person who came seventh, because the seventh was Luke, who had the light blue one, and he was criticised from his alignment of the collar. The winner on this one was Ailsa. Although her lining wasn't good, she had the silver and gold colour. What's your thoughts about the end result and the winner?
The thing that surprises me about Ailsa is she always seems to be very surprised about what she actually produces. She was actually the only one to actually finish it. It wasn't, up to great standard. And I also thought, not only working with the sequins, the collar, the cuffs, but it was stripy webbing. It was stripy. It would have been so much easier for them if it was a plain tubular. It almost would have been easier because a lot of them weren't in line either. You could see it wasn't lined up properly. I actually liked the colour of Luke's. I did like the colour of his. I did think though that Pasha, she had a lot of boo-boos on her seams. Those cuffs on the inside, they were really messy. And again, I think going back to working with sequins, one of the things that I would say is it's probably a no-no from Alistair's professional, but when I've used sequins, I try and undo a couple of those sequins so they're not quite in that seam. I know that you're not meant to do that, Alistair, but it just sometimes eases that bulk in the seams. And also the other thing that I think it was only Elsa that I saw lay out the sequins, you know, actually lay out that fabric flat and look at what direction the sequins were actually going in as well. Because when you actually looked at some of the bomber jackets, the way they put it together, a bit like pattern matching, some sequins were going in one direction, some were going in the other. And I think if they'd have all started off in the same direction, maybe in the beginning, and just understood what they were using a bit better. But I do think that Elsa was the best. She, I hate to say out of a bad lot, I think they had a bad project to do, but I think she did get it finished. She did get it finished. So I think you've got to give her that. But Georgie, you know, I think it was hard. It was just hard. And I think they all struggled on the time limit on it, really. I think if they had that little bit of time to understand, instead of just cutting straight away, you know, they sort of get it. They don't seem to have that time. They just cut. And sometimes you've got to understand what you're working with, haven't you? You've got to look at it. You've got to lay it out. You've got to know which way it's work. And it just didn't seem to feel that way.
What about you, Alistair? What was your thoughts on the winner? And I mean, we've championed Marcus and Luke in the past. Luke came 7th purely and simply, although they did say his sewing was good, it was purely and simply down to the collar. Marcus had the rainbow rib lining.
He came 3rd.
He came 3rd. His neck wasn't right either.
No.
But they liked his colours.
Yeah.
Alistair, what's your thoughts?
I thought Elsa, I think Elsa, I think on this one deserved to win. It was a bit, I think it was a bit of an uphill struggle trying to judge it, because most of them had got, say, the neckline wrong, and there were so many things. And also, especially when they were putting in the lining, and especially around the cuffs, didn't seem, I mean, it's the way that it's edited, but it didn't really seem that fair. So for instance, if Luke's collar wasn't particularly right, but he had hand stitched the lining back and the lining was appropriately stitched on the cuff, then he should have gotten extra points for that. It shouldn't have just have been the visibility of the collar. The collar's a quick fix. But when everyone else has, say, butchered the inside, and I keep going on about how the inside should look as beautiful as the outside, coming from a couturier's point of view, then I think what's the score sheet here? Because you can't say that, oh well, you've really mullered those, you know, cuffs, you know, and when they pulled them up and you're looking at them, oh, but your collar's not nice. So from a visual point of view, from the outside, you know, it looks perfect, but the inside, you know, so they were marking the lining. So I think it was a very difficult one, because we didn't get to see everybody's lining inside. And also Georgie's one, she'd actually used a sequin fabric that had almost like a strip of chiffon that was in between. So
yeah,
it wasn't really a level playing field. But in actual fact, I thought her concept and idea was nice, because you actually got that lovely pink showing through. So in actual fact, I actually thought that was a positive thing. I think Esme commented on that as well. But the fact that the lining wasn't hand sewn along the bottom, it's just it's. I think I think we need to be clearer on what they're actually grading, because it didn't seem fair across the board.
What
Can
would
I
be
ask, sorry, Kim, can I just ask Alistair or and yourself, when it comes to the ribbing, do you think it would have been easier on the eye if it was a plain ribbing around? It just bothered me, that whole stripe. It was almost like they were trying to catch them out very early, and it just stood out it really triggered me in places that the stripes were just so uneven in places, so you could see that their seam allowances were completely out. But I just think, as pretty as they were, because they would have looked lovely with the sequins, do you both think that it should have been a plain ribbing, really?
I think so, with all the sequins going on. I didn't necessarily think that the ribbing in this particular challenge really warranted having to be showcased so much. I thought it didn't detract from it. It suited the garment. However, I take your point on there. I think that rather than having to make that stripe be completely symmetrical and even, I think they'd given them a wee bit too much to be figuring out, whereas plain would have been, but fair enough on the cuffs, because hardly anyone could get that wrong. But when you're dealing with a neckline, especially when you're having to cut it to then disappear in, that's a little skill in itself. Whereas if it was just plain, you had a little bit of wiggle room. I think it was a bit unfair.
Or did it make it easier for the judges to see that it wasn't?
Well,
let's turn this round. The one thing I will say on things for equipment, because you know what I'm like with my sewing machine and me bits and pieces, the quilt clips, using those don't necessarily do the job as well as pins would have done, particularly on the collar, because when you're using the quilt clips, you are able to move through the clip a little bit, whereas a pin, Alistair's tip is to halve it, quarter it, and get your evenly spaced. I think they might have got a far better effect using the a steel pin rather than using the quilt clips, and it would have kept that ribbon in place and may have helped. But I would not want to do it in 3 hours, I'll be honest with you, ever.
Well, definitely not. Definitely not.
So if we move on to the transformation challenge, this was an animal-themed fancy dress from a beach towel, or actually 2 beach towels, and they could use any haberdashery that they wanted. They couldn't use any more fabric. They were given felt. It had to be a recognisable animal, and it had to fit the mannequin. And you had to get the right colour of towel. And they only, and the comment I will make is, they only provided 1 white towel. So Susie bless her, didn't wrestle the white towel quick enough, and I thought it was ingenious that she did what she needed to do with the white towel. So I think again, it's one of those, and we've talked about it from the beginning, that it is a bit of a scrum to get to that fabric, and on this occasion, poor Susie went out. The only other thing I will say before I ask the questions is the winner. I felt she had practiced that to within an inch of her life. That pattern was spot on. So I'm going to go straight to, I'm not going to go to you, Elsa, because you're down in gin and tonic. Sasha, what's your thoughts on the winners and the losers on that one, or the concept and the ideas?
So I was actually really looking forward to that, because obviously I used to make a lot of costumes for the girls, and World Book Day, all of that. Being a single mum, not having much money, so I couldn't go out and buy things, so I was really looking forward to this. I actually thought the alligator was amazing. I did think it was amazing, but she had literally practiced that, like you say. I mean, even when it comes to the stuffing, that head was solid, I thought it was brilliant. And then you sort of go down to second place, the lion, and I actually I would have liked to have seen that win, because I actually thought it was such a good concept, using things like the boning to get the actual mane to stick up, the tail, the colours that she used. When it comes to Susie's swan, I thought, well done. I don't understand why that they had a load of towels and then they chuck in 1 leopard print one. Maybe they should have had 2 or 3 patterned ones to make it fair across the board. But well done to her for turning side out. I felt the swan looked a little bit like it had had a heavy night the night before, but the head was a little bit scary, is what I actually wrote down, scary. The feet, I thought the feet were ingenious. I thought they were a really, really good tip to do them on the elastic. I've done that before. I felt really bad for Georgie. The idea was good. The butterfly concept was good. But again, 90 minutes, 90 minutes to do that alligator. That's why that was practice and practice. I just felt really sad for the butterfly, Georgie's butterfly, because I thought it was such a good idea. It was just such a shame that, again, it looked like a child had tried to pull one of the wings off and it was a little bit lopsided. And then, of course, she spent so much time on that she didn't actually have much time to concentrate on the body of the towel. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I did like Alyssa's Dalmatian. I did think they were a bit overexcited about the Dalmatian. I did like the lead. I liked the ribbon, the red. Again, I felt that it wasn't justified third place, but that's my own personal opinion. But no, my favourite out of all of it, I did like the lion. I thought the lion was brilliant.
Alistair, what's your thoughts?
Good.
Well, this challenge is right up my street, especially with Sasha saying that, because my son would come home and World Book Day would just literally...
It's tomorrow.
Yeah, and my son, that's like the show I've just done on Create and Craft, we had fleece on, and I said, if you're ever going to buy a fabric and you don't really know why you're buying it, this is the best fabric to make costumes out of. You just lay the fabric down, lay your kid on the floor, cut around it. You can create so many shapes. You don't have to seam it. There's no finishing. There's no nothing. So I really like this challenge. I actually thought that this was, you see, I don't really like the transformation challenges. However, I actually thought this was actually quite a useful one, especially for parents at home that maybe haven't had a go at making a costume and have always bought one, say, off, the big river, and it comes next day and what have you. Then you have to check, then you have to send it back because the size that you got was 5 to 6, but in actual fact, your child is 7 to 8, that kind of thing. I thought I thought the judging was a bit skewed, just because they were going so much on about the fact that, this one's really used towels, but why give them felt and everything else if you just wanted them to use the towels? Don't say, don't say to a 5-year-old, here is a plate of sweets, now you're not to touch them, do not touch them, but we're just going to leave it here, but yeah, I thought I really did like the lion. I thought that, using the boning, which would scare the living daylights out of a lot of people at home, but naturally, fact, seeing a contestant use it and showing that it's not that scary and that you can do it, and it's not just for bridal wear, and you can create shapes. You could actually, we've used it in hat fascinators before to create big swirls to incorporate with dresses. So yeah, I thought it was really, really good. I do agree with you about the alligator. I make a lot of patterns for buddies, desk buddies and things like that, and I know how much prototyping it takes to get a shape bang on. Now, if I was to get a shape bang on first time, I'm kind of winning at life. But for instance, you could cut a pattern for it and it could be too big or too small. It looked very exact. I'm not taking away from her because literally it was executed excellently. Just a fun fact. So the swan dress by Bjork was actually designed by a gentleman called Marian Pekolsky. And he is also an ex-Central St. Martin's chap. And I actually worked for Marian Pekolsky when I was still at Central St. Martin's. And it was in the days of Jeremy Scott, who you might have also have heard, who is the head designer at Moschino. And he's done all those big concept catwalk pieces with SpongeBob SquarePants, and done a lot of with Nickelodeon and very way out sort of things. So yes, so I had a lot of fun working with Marion. He always had the Disney Mickey Mouse ears on. he no, he literally wore them all the time. And in fact, you knew it was him in the distance in the library because all you would see is these black ears. So, and it didn't matter what he was wearing, but he would have the ears
Yeah,
on.
the ears on.
Yeah. So yeah, so it was it was a lot of fun. So I know that designer very, very well. Bless him.
Well, there's a couple of things. If you're at home and you're wanting to make costumes and you don't have your hands on boning, and you get a parcel that's wrapped around with that nylon webbing, always keep that. I always kept that because
always, yeah,
absolutely spot on, and will sew really well. And sew a tube and just shove it in. It's brilliant for that. So I thought, from a recycling, you know how they're really into this recycling, repurposing. I would have rather have seen that on the table, I'll be honest with you, to give them structure. And the other thing that concerned me was Susie described her outfit at the beginning to the presenter as being Bjork, had Bjork vibes and inspired. And then Patrick and Esme, now they came out with that straight away. And I'm thinking, is it really a secret? Do they really not know who's made these things? Because it was just that reference again to Bjork, which seemed an odd reference to make with regards to Susie's. I loved Susie's. I thought it was great. The fact that it looked drunk was amazing, because it definitely looked.
I do think sometimes with the show you come away and you think, oh, you know, that was brilliant or wasn't so good or whatever. But what I liked about it is the fact that it actually showed us mums and dads, grandparents, that you can make something and it can look unfinished, doesn't have to be perfect.
You still there? I think we're frozen. I think she's frozen.
Oh,
she's doing a Disney.
That was quite a confidence thing.
Sorry,
she's let it go.
Yeah, we actually lost you for a second. We're laughing.
Oh, sorry.
We think you're doing a Frozen. So you said you thought it was a really good idea because of mums and dads didn't have to be finished.
No, it doesn't have to be finished. It can be almost, you know, rough looking around the edges. It's, you know, it's quite nice to see that it wasn't perfect, you know, on the necks where the hoods were. You know, if you can imagine it attaching a hood onto a towel to make it into a poncho, you know, some of them were quite, you know, the fish was a little bit, you know, but it had a good popper on it. And again, it was one of those things where it did look unfinished. And actually, I think it was going to give parents a little bit of confidence to be able to do these things. And yeah, I did. I thought it was a brilliant task last night. I did like the task.
It was one of my favourites. We're going to talk about poppers in a second, but before we move on to the fitting challenge, I just want to announce last week's winner. So as everybody knows, people leave comments on the House of Alistair YouTube channel, and we do read all of them. And some people agree, some people disagree. It's fabulous. Keep them coming. But the winner for the House of Alistair pressing mat is Eileen R11. Now you'll know who you are. I will try and send you a message, Eileen. If you are listening to this, can you email? And I'm going to put the email address in the comments below as well, so you'll know where to email. Because I was saying contact us, Alistair, and people have done a really good job getting hold of us. Forgot to tell people. This week's prize, Alistair, do you want to announce what this week's prize is?
So this week's prize is 2 fat quarter packs. So we've got a spring summery fat quarter pack there. So this is a polycotton one. So you've got how many? 2, 4. So you've got 6 in that one, and you've got a really useful one for the summer. You've got these lovely ginghams here. So again, you've got 6 in there. So those should roughly retail for around about 25 to £30, depending on where you are, because I've forgotten the cost. I've forgotten the retail prices. But it's a nice little bundle. So if you want to be in with a chance of winning, all you simply have to do, it doesn't cost anything. You just need to leave a comment, whether it's good, bad, indifferent, whether you agree with Kim, disagree, or disagree with Sasha. And if anyone disagrees with me, my name is Esme. And yeah, so just go on.
And the other thing I want to quickly mention, because Sasha, you've immediately gone on to poppers, and in the next challenge, there was the Prym, the new Vario tool. It's called the Vario Creative Tool, and this is what it looks like. Now, they did in the last challenge make a little bit of a Henry's of a few of their poppers. Sasha already has one. I have one here, and I will be doing a YouTube video going on the House of Alistair as to how to use these. Now, this Vario Creative Tool is amazing. It's ergonomically designed. It's so light, you can see it takes minimal amount of pressure to get a maximum effect, and you can do all sorts. So you can apply your buttons, you can apply your eyelets, you can use even the little they did have the 11 and the 14 mil little poppers, which are just great. Poppers are fab. I would have, on the bomber jacket, I would have had the poppers going on.
Definitely. Definitely.
So we have managed to secure a very small amount of the stock. Now, these retail at £129. That's the recommended retail price. But if you want one, leave a comment, and I'll also put our email addresses, and they will be £99. Now, inside the box, we get all of the tools to do the different sizes. And the reason that the sewing contestants had such a lot of trouble, I think, is that they're not using the right size with the particular button or popper or eyelet that they're applying. And it's so easy to do. Honestly, children can do these. So if you want your own, they're £99. And as I say, they're normally £129. Leave a comment and we will get hold of you. Or we'll also leave the email addresses and you can email. So we've got those. They're fantastic. What do you think of yours, Sasha? You had yours straight away in the car as soon as I mentioned it.
I did. I absolutely love it. I think that for things like denim, for things like, you know, those really chunky denim, the really big metal buttons, that's it, you know, they are great for things like that. If you've got dexterity problems and you can't do the pliers, they are amazing. You can actually get a little clip that attaches to your sewing table as well, so it's fixed as well, and I'm sure they can get that from you. And you know, there is an absolute beautiful amount of different coloured eyelets. And it's that thing, isn't it, is of taking your project from basic handmade to professional. Exactly. And you're not going to get the problem that they had last night where poppers were falling off. Poppers were falling off left, right and centre. Poppers that have got dents in, things like that. It feels nice, it feels secure. And like I say, if you have got a problem with your hands and things, you know, and even from an accessibility point of view, you know, I'm all about accessibility with obviously my Lily, who's got a stoma and colostomy, about making clothes more accessible for her. Things like poppers, because she doesn't do Velcro, it's the whole sensory thing. Again, it's easy, you know, it's easy, and this makes it easy. So yeah, and you've got it on an amazing price.
It is an amazing price. Yeah, it really is. And what we'll do is we'll bring more of the accessories that go with it, because it does such a lot. Now, the original Vario pliers are the hand ones, so you've got your 11 and your 14 mil ones. It'll work on that. It'll actually punch holes in. But we have got this is 2 layers of denim. It's gone through absolutely no problem at all. As I say, we'll do it as a demonstration. So
and that whole upcycling thing, isn't it? But again, that upcycling, you know, I mean, a lot of the costumes last night, I was actually thinking when they were doing things like on the costumes, it would have been great on the fish to see some of those eyelets as scales and things like that, you know. I mean, obviously they've only got 90 minutes, but yeah, it is a it's an amazing bit of kit, and when it's all set up, and it's just easy, you know. And what I love about the fact with Prym is they think about everybody. You know, they think about, you know, the whole dexterity thing with your hands. I struggled with the pliers, you know, well, let's make it easier for people. And when I say it's like butter, isn't it? It goes through, it makes that hole, you're not having to struggle. So again, it's a brilliant one, absolutely brilliant.
So as I say, leave a comment, and then we'll talk about obviously all of the problems that they had. I can assure you, you will not have if you just take a few minutes and use it properly. So we'll go straight into this last.
Oh, can I just ask a quick question? Something that was mentioned last night, and I didn't know what it was. A lapped seam.
Alistair,
do you know what a lapped
seam?
A lapped seam. Something to do with toweling. And I didn't know what a lapped seam was. And I didn't know if one of the contestants had said it. I think it was either Luke or Marcus. Or was it?
Did they mean a felled seam?
It could have been. Maybe it was my hearing. I wasn't sure what they were saying. And it was something to do with making that toweling not so bulky in that seam. And I didn't understand what they were trying to say. So I thought,
So yes, seam. Well, you're the expert. You go for it.
No. I think if it's what I'm thinking, it's where when you're creating the seam, rather than just like pin hemming it, where you're folding it under a centimeter, then folding it again, you get that seam appears to have a lot of bulk. But when you actually take, say, a smaller part of the seam allowance and then you fold it over, but you leave a bit of a channel in between, so you could almost put thread elastic through it if you wanted to. Then you've got that, and that actually eases it out. If that's what it is. I didn't pick up on that last night.
Yeah. I think it was to get rid of the bulk. So I think what they've done is they've made one side smaller, one side slightly longer. So like you say, it sits flatter. So I think it was a felled seam rather than it lapped over. It could be called a lapped seam. It laps over, but I think felled lapped seam. I think that's what they were meaning, Sasha.
Thank you, because I was a bit like, I've not heard of that before. So every day's a learning day.
Because if you think about it, if you've got all of if you're trying to fold over and finish it almost like a so if you look on your denim jeans, you know, when you've got that sort of like seam where they've done that's exactly what Prym's explained. They cut one part of the seam allowance really small, about 5 millimeters, and then they fold the other seam allowance. But with those seam allowance, you can't do that unless you're really, really good. You can't really do that on a centimeter seam allowance. It goes back to the old sort of and the reason why, for instance, old dressmaking patterns had, for instance, an inch worth of seam inside was because clothes were supposed to be altered. So as you got bigger, you altered them, so you let them out or you took them in. And in a lot of Savile Row suits and couture, we still do that. We cut the seam allowance much, much bigger just because that garment has to have longevity. So, but nowadays with commercial pattern cutting, it's all about margins, and it's all about streamlining and getting the pattern pieces to match up so you get the maximum amount of the fabric. Everything's about cost and pennies and little bits of that. So that's the introduction of the centimeter seam allowance. But also that came in as well when you say you would go to your tailor, it didn't matter who you necessarily were. But until the mills who milled the fabric in the Victorian era, until new machinery came in that actually allowed them to actually do all these new different processes, you would go in and you would see a tailor and you would have your workwear done. So you would buy a wool suit, and that's what you would have, and it would have extra seam allowance inside, so you could adjust, you could let it out, and a suit would go on and on and on. I mean, an interesting
I never knew that.
Well, an interesting person who is our current king. So Welsh and Jeffreys is a Savile Row tailor on Savile Row, and they have the royal warrant, and that is was Prince Charles, but it will now be the King's tailors on Savile Row. He is notoriously, in a good way, he would bring suits that he had had from the 70s, and we call it a remolding process. So, for instance, in the couture sense, we would say, oh, she's having her Jones taken out. And what we meant was from 80s, you would have these ginormous shoulder pads. So you would take the shoulder pads out, put a smaller one in, but you'd have to then start cleverly cutting the garment back to bring it up to date. And King Charles, I keep getting that wrong. But he would, for special occasions, when you saw him on state visits and things like that, he never commissioned new suits. He was very mindful and frugal in terms of that. So the royal family, from his point of view, he would he would send his suits in to be repaired, but he would have the 70s collar shaved down, so it was more in keeping with the fashion of the time. Obviously, once you cut it off, you can't grow it back on. So if big lapels come back in, then you're a bit scuppered, really. But yeah, he's a big advocate, our Charles, in that. So it's a little interesting fact.
That's brilliant. Wow. So we're going to briefly talk about the fitting challenge, because I think even they skipped over it last night. So it was supposed to be a trip down memory lane, inspired by a childhood photograph of the contestants. Now, the thing that's controversial is they were given the measurements of their little models, and they had an hour prior to measuring their little models to cut out. So the cutting out was done before they confirmed the measurements. They all had different photographs, and the photographs their finished garments had to be inspired by those photographs. I'll go straight to Sasha, and just what did you think of that challenge, and did you have a particular favourite?
I was a little bit disappointed with it, actually, for the reason that you said. They cut everything out beforehand. The one that really got everyone seemed to stick to the rules, apart from Marcus, the spacesuit.
Yeah,
that really, it bugged me. It did bug me. The fact that I loved the fabric. I loved that cream with that grey in it. I loved the denim with the jumpsuit. Patches, I thought they were a cop-out. I'm sorry, I thought the patches were a cop-out, and I thought he just ironed them on, and I thought it would have been great if he'd have even, stitched some of them back on. So I was a little bit disappointed there. I really liked Pasha's. I thought that using the denim and the broderie on glaze was a really modern feel to the old picture that she had. Susie. The patchwork skirt. I would have said straight away those patches needed, the squares needed to be a lot smaller. She then decided to line, which was a good thing to do, and she did use the bagging technique, but you didn't see it too closely, so I don't know how it sort of what the inside actually looked like, but it sort of got a little bit lost, really, because the patches were so big. What else did I
wonder why, or should she have been allowed to actually sew her patches beforehand and bring the fabric like they all do? Because they don't make the fabric. So the fact that it was a patchwork,
no, they don't actually.
So why didn't she? I don't know, there might be a rule to say that they couldn't, but at home she could have taken her time and done maybe 2 or 3 inches. I would have not exceeded 3 inches. I think they went
definitely. They were big, weren't they? They were like probably 4, maybe 5 inches.
But nobody else makes their fabric, so
no,
I don't know why she wasn't allowed to create her fabric at home.
No, and the other, Elsa again. Really good fabric choice. I thought the mermaid theme was really, really cute. The high-low hem, she'd even had that tip from Esme, to say, make sure that there is that difference in that high low, so it doesn't look like it's just a little bit wonky, and it did look like it was just a little bit wonky. But what I liked the hardware they were using. I liked that they were using D-rings, sliders. I liked the fact that there was, you know, the velvet dungarees I thought were lovely. She did waste a lot of time top stitching all on that velvet. There wasn't, you know, she didn't need to do that. A favourite one, I don't know. I quite liked the racing suit. I thought that was quite cute. But again, I think if it came to it, I think I would have gone for Pasha, although her rah-rah wasn't very rah-rah-ish. But I did like the fabric choice. I did really like that. Yeah.
What about you, Alistair?
I slightly struggled with this one just because it was supposed to be an inspiration from a childhood picture. And again, it goes back to the judging and what they were sort of saying. Like on some of them, like especially when they're critiquing Georgie, she used denim. So her inspiration was, and she made a completely new garment. And I actually thought her execution of that garment actually, apart from the side that Esme pulled up, but I thought the look of it when it came down the catwalk, I thought it's really nicely pressed. It looks as if it fits really well. You know,
the light and dark worked well, didn't it?
Yeah, and I thought that was really, really. I thought that was really, really nice. Luke, I really liked his. I thought that was very, you know, club kids and sort of like really quite funky. I could see that being sold in a big famous department store. I could see that in a children's wear line. The rah-rah, I did like the broadly anglaise and the denim. There was just a lot of like for instance, my least favorite, I have to say, was Susie's. I understand that the skirt, if you like, was something that she had made for her for her, and I get that, but I thought what she almost sort of did, I don't think there was any. I don't know what it was. Like for instance, every week when she comes, she does, you know, these ginormous sort of voluminous sort of like, this is who I am, this is the way that I create or design, if you like. And then suddenly we go to a skirt, and then she's made this really plain top. I just didn't.
That was out of jersey, the top. She did have an elasticated waist. I think in her defence, I mean, I think a skirt, which sounds as if it's a pure Geordie thing, which is short with a skirt wrap, they're brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant. And she actually wasn't the only one that made the skirt, because wasn't it
Pasha as well, wasn't it?
Pasha
Pasha did a skirt.
Well, the difference with the two were Susie's was obvious because it was a wrap, whereas Pasha's was part and parcel of, it looked like a skirt with the shorts underneath. So the construction was slightly different. I think
so was it classed as a skirt then?
They did describe both of them as skirts.
Yeah, but was it because she used a different, you know, she used a lycra, didn't she, for the shorts?
Yes.
And normally a skirt is the sort of same fabric, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I was a bit of a cop out with, you know, the lime green almost cycling shorts underneath it to be classed as a skirt. So, you know, like you say, in Susie's defense, she did bag it. She did do a good technique of actually doing the skirt. I didn't understand why it hung a little bit at the front. Didn't get that.
Maybe it was just the thing is with children, no disrespect to children out there, but my 5-year-old granddaughter has got the best little tummy on her ever. And it wouldn't matter. She's gorgeous. She's slim. It's just certain children, and then all of a sudden they'll shoot up, and then they'll go out, and so I don't necessarily think children are always the best shape. And it did concern me that the measuring had been given to them prior to and they'd cut out using those measurements. I thought Susie had failed on the patchwork size, but I did like yours. One thing I'm going to come to you, Alistair, about Luke's boiler suit, which was fastened with a D-ring. That was really well made, but so was Marcus's. That's where's these patches fell off, and I felt for them. And the tip is you iron them on for 20 to 30 minutes. Anything that's fusible or ironable, whether it's Borsal or Vliseline, iron it for 20 to 30 minutes and walk away. But he didn't. He ironed it and then started handling the fabric straight away. And so therefore the glue heated up and it didn't have time to dry, and that's why they fell off. There's no ifs or buts about that. But his actual jumpsuit was really well made.
It was good.
Yeah.
It was nice. I loved the fabric of it. I loved that cream. I loved that cream and it had that grey flecking. I really liked, as I say, it was just a shame he didn't sort of top stitch them on. But yeah, I really liked the fabric of the jumpsuit. I think it was
and
nice.
Use this properly. The pockets.
Yeah. If they'd have all used it properly.
So obviously at the end, the garment of the week, and it's the first time they've done that, they went back to the transformation challenge, and that was the crocodile stroke alligator that Pasha had made. And the person who went home this week was Georgie. And the reason that they gave, which I thought was a bit disappointing, was that they hadn't seen the link with their photograph in our final project. Sasha, what did you think about who stayed, who went home?
I thought that Susie should have gone, personally. I think that Georgie has had some good makes. She has had some good makes. It was a bad week for her. I actually thought when they said about the link, I actually thought going back to the spacesuit, that wasn't much of a link. He wasn't even in that outfit. So yeah, I was quite sad. I think that Susie's sort of I think she's had her day, but that's my personal opinion. Pasha the crocodile, it was obvious, wasn't it? It was good. It was absolutely amazing. Yeah, I was just a little bit sad that it was Georgie that went.
Alistair, what did you think, darling?
So I'm just chasing a big black Tom out the garden because literally I've got a little grey cat that Kim's actually met when she visited me, but literally she's hiding in a bush because he's not a particularly nice cat. So anyway, so the Tom has gone to bye Tom. Yeah, I thought I mean, look, the crocodile was or alligator was lovely. It was really, really cute. The final pattern challenge this week wasn't necessarily my favorite. Alex, who took all that time to top stitch into her velvet, I just thought it was so much work for very little. It wasn't my favorite made to measure week this week. But yeah, I mean, look, the garment of the week, the alligator was lovely. You know, so, and it was very you know, it was clever.
One thing that really irritated me was the amount of irons that were stood on the end and were filthy. Get the flipping iron cleaners. Alistair, you've got these on your website.
Weren't they bad?
They were
awful.
Yeah, you need one of these in your lives. So I will put the link on because it really irritated me that all I could see was, it was probably sequins and goodness knows what.
Sequins, yeah, that's what I was going to say, melted sequins.
I do hope they clean them before their next challenge. Otherwise, there's going to be some sad people. So the next challenge is going to be lingerie week. They're going to have a pajama party. There's a transformation. And then there is lingerie-inspired garments for the final fitting challenge. We will see what happens. Am I right in saying we have got Nigel May next week as well joining us? I'm almost sure we have Nigel, the lovely, gorgeous Nigel May. Sasha, thank you so much for spending some time. I know you're not in the best of health at the moment.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's been absolutely brilliant. I will put Sasha is on Facebook and Instagram, and it's Sasha Sew 123.
Sasha Sews 123, yeah.
And your website hopefully will be up in July. So, but if you need anything from Sasha, then please contact her direct. She does have some fabulous rulers which are available on Create and Craft, but get them from Sasha direct. Alistair, you still have the 15% discount, including the iron-on cloths and the iron cleaners. 15% discount, and all you need to do is put in capital BEE 15, so that's B15, and you'll get 15% off everything. And lastly, don't forget, like a bit of a sales pitch tonight, but don't forget that we've got a limited number of these, the Vario Creative Tools, which are £99. Pop a comment in or email us. So until next week, thank you again, Sasha, and thank you, Alistair, and stop chasing.
Thank you very much, Sasha.
Good job. It's a good job it hadn't started to rain, mind. Then you would have been stuck.
No, I know.
He's in his garden chasing Tom.
I know. I am in my garden chasing Toms.
Okie dokie. Well, goodbye, everybody, and see you next week. Take care.
Bye.